However, you can opt to turn off your video. They have a feature that makes sure that your video doesn't appear in the recording, but we will hear the questions. So if you don't want too much personal information in there, then don't put it in there. We want to round table this and make it super useful for everybody. So if your question contains a lot of detail, maybe just use your first name or your initials so that it's not on that recording and you can still get it answered. Is that fair for everyone? I'm going to assume you're all clapping profusely right now. So I'm Dr. Roy. As Becca said, I am a natural medicine doctor. I'm a fancy kind. Some of you may have heard this already because some of you are my patients. That means I have both the conventional medical training and the training in natural therapies. My medical license allows me to prescribe drugs in states like Vermont. However, in Michigan, we're kind of behind. In Michigan, when we're talking about natural therapies, nutrition, those kinds of things, particularly in a cancer population, you're very vulnerable. Anybody can call themselves natural, holistic, integrative. That doesn't mean much here. So it's really hard to find someone who has the skill to help you to choose what natural therapies are going to be safe, what's going to be effective, and what is going to be cost effective in getting you to your goals, which obviously are to be cancer free and to live the life that you're intended to live. My board certification is something called integrative oncology, as Becca mentioned. And as an integrative oncologist, my job is to prevent side effects from treatment, drug treatment, surgery, and radiation, to make sure that we prevent those side effects both today and long term, to lower the risk of recurrence, to slow progression, and to make sure we're looking at you as a whole person. There's so many pieces that go into cancer care, and we might have time to talk about what that model looks like a little bit later. I'm going to share my screen and do some drawing for you in terms of what the cancer model is now and where it should be and can be, and what we do to enhance that for you. With me is Andriana Conda, and I can't figure out how to find her in this huge group because her video isn't showing up. I see beautiful Lisa, which I love because I'm getting lots of smiles and encouragement from her, and I see Becca, of course. Andriana is on there somewhere. She's a gorgeous girl with a bob, and she's got her scrubs on because she's still in clinic. And there she goes. Okay. And she's a nutrition oncology specialist, but she's also an exercise specialist in terms of patients who have gone through cancer treatment and are facing different kinds of stressors. So things like frozen shoulder after breast cancer surgery, or lymphedema after having an axillary node dissection, or maybe you've gone through colorectal and you've got some nerve pain and you've got difficulty with muscle weakness on one side. We're really lucky to have her because she has both those kinds of expertise, and really can target that, bringing you back to that full quality of life. So enough about me. I want to get started. And Becca, what was the title of today's talk? I never know what I'm talking about.
Let me get the title exactly.
What was it? What are we talking about?
The exact title is, What is a Cancer Fighting Diet in Survivorship?
Oh, okay. That's an easy one. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody and pull up a whiteboard. And Lisa, because you're the only person I can see, my best friend for tonight's talk, if you could give me a thumbs up just from your video right there, if you can see my whiteboard here. Can you see that? Nope, not yet. Becca, can you see my screen? So somebody's
I can see it. I can see it great. If you're on a phone, you might need to swipe over.
I can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the basics of a cancer fighting diet, and then we're going to open it up for questions. And do you see the chat over on the right? Please go ahead and put your questions in there as well. Even if you type slowly, we'll scroll through and answer them as we go. Okay. And yeah, Rebecca, if you want to spotlight my video, I think that's a great idea. Okay. So there's 3 strategies for a cancer fighting diet, and there's a lot of information out there, right? Everybody's telling you what to eat to fight cancer, and some of it can be so hard and so restrictive. And we'll talk about some of those strategies, but let's talk about the basics. If you do these basic things, you're going to be doing everything 90% correct. The first is to eat real foods. So some of you have heard me say this, and you've heard me say this pretty often. What is a real food? So, for example, is I can't believe it's not butter a real food. So, right, no, as some of you know, right? It's butter is a real food. How about 1% milk? 1% milk a real food? Andriana, are you muted? Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Kanda? Is 1% milk a real food?
It is not.
It is not, because it is chemically altered. And so when a cow is giving us milk, they're definitely not 1% cows versus whole cows, right? Every cow is giving us milk and it's altered in order to make it 1%. Our body responds to foods that are not real as though they are chemicals. And when our body responds to things that are chemicals, that causes inflammation. I want you guys to pin that word in your mind, inflammation. We're going to come back to that. Okay, so eating real foods is really important, mostly because it lowers inflammation in the body and it helps to create an environment in which cancer has a hard time growing. Okay, what is our second cancer fighting strategy? The next strategy would be to eat less. So eat a little less. It doesn't mean getting crazy about it and really restricting. It means eating a little less. That may mean 1 portion for those of us who eat 2. That may mean dropping the 4th meal if we eat 3. That may mean just using a smaller plate. Now, that's not true for everybody. Some of us obviously need to gain or hold weight in order to do well with treatment. Some of us struggle with disordered eating or eating disorders. And in that case, eating a little less may not work for us. Maybe eating a little bit less more frequently might work better. Either way, a little bit less is a cancer fighting strategy. Okay. And then the last is to eat more plants. So, Dr. Kondo, what would be examples of plants, for example?
Vegetables and fruits.
Vegetables and fruit.
Some of the vegetables.
Vegetables and fruits. And we can throw legumes in there. They're not technically plants, but they are plant-based, right? They are in that family, moving away from animal fat. So again, I don't want you to get crazy with this. So let's kind of visualize what this looks like so we can make this more usable to us. And you're going to see me looking all around the screen, because what I'm doing is looking for my pen and my pencil so I can be a beautiful artist here. So this is my plate, and I'm just going to choose a little bit smaller of a plate, right? I'm going to divide that plate in 4, and I'm going to make this portion my broccoli, and this portion my broccoli, this portion my broccoli, and this portion my mac and cheese. So it's just switching or flipping what we technically think about as a traditional meal. We're just flipping the script. Normally, this would be our macaroni and cheese, and this would be our broccoli, right? And eating real food. So broccoli is obviously a real food. Is mac and cheese a real food, Dr. Kanda?
We only wish.
That's not true. Sometimes it can be, right? So if we use a good high quality pasta, and if we use a good high quality cheese, and if we're using a real butter, and if we're using a real milk, is even if it's an oat milk or a coconut milk or a hemp milk or any of those, wouldn't that be a real food?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay, great. I'm going to open this up for questions right now. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask me what you'd like to ask us, or go ahead and put it in the chat. The questions that we want to focus on here are any questions about what constitutes or what looks like a cancer fighting diet. And if nobody, oh, there we go. Is whole milk a real food? So Mary, that's an excellent question. It is a real food. The question is it necessarily good for you, right? So even though these strategies, if we follow them, we're going to be pretty well off, right? But we can get even cleaner. Is cow's milk dairy helpful? It usually isn't. And the reason why is it's meant to make cells grow. I want you guys to pin that as well. I just said pin inflammation in your minds. Let's pin making cells grow. Why does it make cells grow? Because it's meant for baby cows. So any breast milk from any animal is meant to cause cell growth. We now have good data that shows us that cow's milk actually does increase the risk of breast cancer and the risk of recurrence. So it's not a great source of dairy. So another question would be plant-based, meaning say earth balanced butter. Is earth balanced butter better than real butter? Is earth balanced? Does that mean anything to you? Is that something coming out of the earth? It's hydrogenated and polysaccharide. I can't remember exactly what's in it, but it's a combination of oils meant to taste like butter. Many of them are derived from palm or soy. So no, it is not a real food, and no, it's not good for you. It's a synthesized or a chemical derivation that is made to look like something is good for you. A lot of times vegans and vegetarians will use earth balance, and I'd rather you use a coconut oil or an olive oil or an avocado oil. Is soy milk a good soy like tofu and tempeh? It is not, unless you're getting it from Eden soy. So soy milk is a plant-based food, or soy, excuse me, is a plant-based food, and it's an excellent way to lower risk of breast, prostate at 2 or less portions a day. But again, we're talking about whole foods here, right? So you want to aim for miso, soybeans, edamame, tofu, tempeh. Soy milk is usually a factory derived derivative unless you're getting it from Eden soy. I'm lactose intolerant, so I drink almond milk. Is that okay? It absolutely is. And a great brand is Khalifa. You can get that unsweetened with vanilla in it, and that's a good, healthy source of almond milk, or you can make it yourself. There's some excellent blogs like Nourished Kitchen or Wellness Mama. Almond milk is really just filtered water and almonds. So it's pretty simple to make if you wanted to make it yourself. And a great nut-based cream that can be used as a cream base for your mac and cheese that Dr. Konda and I just talked about would be whole cashews blended with just a little bit of that almond milk or water, and you'll get a nice creamy sauce that you can put on a pasta. Okay. Great. And Lila, I want to just mention, Lila said she's lactose intolerant, so she drinks almond milk. Is that okay? Yes, it is. But again, Lila, we're going to come back to the idea of inflammation. Okay, so pin that thought, inflammation and what makes cells grow. Katrina's asking, should we add chlorophyll to our daily diet? So I'm going to put that question aside, and we're going to come back to that. Dr. Konda, can you look at that for me? And so fat-free Greek yogurt is not good for us, correct? Great question, Kathy. Fat-free Greek yogurt. That's a hard one. So fermented foods are easier for your body to process and cause less inflammation. They also have a high level of good bacteria in them. That good bacteria lines the gut, supports your immune system, and actually helps you to fight cancer. So it's kind of a toss-up with that one. We're talking about a cow's milk dairy, but we're talking about something that's also fermented and has a high amount of good bacteria. So that one, I'm going to leave it up to you. Now, if you're a breast cancer patient, or you're trying to lower your risk of breast, it's probably better to aim for a coconut or an almond milk. Okay, great questions, everybody. Dr. Konda, I'm going to ask you to take Anita's question also, and we'll keep it aside. What are good sources of iron? But how about organic oat milk? Milk Mary wants to know. Organic oat milk is great for you. No problems there. If it says organic, then that means 60% of the time, the oats that were used to make that milk were organic oats. Okay, I hope that's clear for everybody. Is spirulina powder healthy? That's a good kind of add-on to chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is like a plant pigment, and spirulina falls in that category. So we're going to come back to those three questions. Thank you, everybody. This was really vibrant. I love that you're using the chat. Again, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, if they hate typing or they're on a phone, go ahead and just ask the question. Okay?
What would be better? What would be better, oat milk or almond milk?
What would be better?
What's healthier?
So great question. What would be better, oat milk or almond milk? So one, it depends on tolerance. Two, it depends on your protein needs. And I think, again, I'm going to have Dr. Konda pick up some of these questions. And maybe she can clarify that a little bit better. So I just saw Debbie, though, ask me about, let's talk about Diet Coke. Debbie, can you unmute yourself and tell me why you asked that question?
I can, and I'm not ashamed to say that my name is Debbie. I'm an addict on Diet Coke. You know, I went off the sauce for a while, and I'm back on it again. And I know it's not good. I think it's the stupidest question probably that I could have asked, but I think a lot of people, you know, maybe lean to it because it doesn't have all the sugar, but it does have, you know, some probably chemically made whatever in there to make it Diet Coke. So
So great question, Debbie. Actually, it's not a question at all. The reality is a lot of people drink Diet Coke, obviously, and we all hide it. And I will be honest, I also drink Diet Coke on occasion. And I know that Dr. Konda is not going to lie to you. She also drinks Diet Coke on occasion. We all
do.
We all know it's not good for us. But like you said, because it's low calorie and low sugar or zero sugar, a lot of us are kind of lean towards it when we want a little pick-me-up. The problem with Diet Coke is it's a chemical concoction that's made to taste like sugar. So it does change your metabolic health. People who drink 2 or more pops a day have a much higher risk of diabetes and insulin-related disorders. Why does that matter? Those kinds of problems with how you use fat and sugar, increase the risk of getting cancer and increase the risk of recurrence. Makes sense to everybody?
yeah.
Okay. So what about matcha green tea? Matcha green tea is an excellent anti-inflammatory, but we're going to come to that when we talk about supplements because it does conflict with a lot of drug treatment. Is stevia a whole food? Dr. Konda, is stevia a whole food?
It is not.
I would disagree there. So stevia is a plant. It is a whole food, but the question is where you're getting it from. So I think that's where we're disagreeing. What Dr. Konda is talking about is maybe stevia that you see in those little packets in a coffee shop or in a restaurant. However, if you're getting a whole plant extract, like a liquid tincture from somewhere, or you're buying the plant itself and using the leaves to spice or sugar your food, that is indeed a whole food. Can we repeat the alternates to Greek yogurt? Dr. Konda, are you watching some of this chat? Can you answer some of those questions that are repeat alternates to Greek yogurt there? And it was almond and coconut, I think, are great alternatives, okay? Can I explain why Eden brand soy milk is okay compared to other brands? Eden Soy is a soy growing company. So their focus is on whole, healthy soy plants. Whereas most companies jumped on that bandwagon of selling soy products and used a factory derived derivative of their currently made products to make those soy products. Okay. Wow, a ton of questions here. I'm going to just answer a couple more and then come back to what I want to talk about with inflammation and cell growth. What about soda with stevia? Soda water with stevia, Mary, is fine. Soda pop with stevia is not. Best foods to protect from prostate cancer, help those with prostate cancer. Great question, Jeff. Miss you, love you. So prostate cancer is the same thing as breast cancer in terms of how we're approaching disease dynamics. So when I talk about breast, Jeff, I'm also talking about prostate, okay? They're analogous in terms of that data. So prostate cancer patients have the benefit of tagging on to all of the robust research that's done around breast cancer because they are so similar in their dynamics and how they grow. So we'll come back to that question in just a minute. Is honey agave a good replacement for sugar? So everything you eat becomes sugar, Sherry. Honey and agave are just different forms of sugar. Is honey a real food? Dr. Konda, I hope we agree. Here's hoping. Is honey a real food?
It is.
It is. I agree too. Agave is also a real food. So are molasses. So honey is obviously from bees' behinds. And maple syrup is from trees. Agave is from a cactus. All of those are real foods. They're decent replacements for sugar. They have different glycemic indexes, which means that they spike your sugar or raise your sugar differently in your body at different rates, right? So out of those, you want to look for the ones based on what you're trying to do with your nutrition plan. And that's something that Dr. Konda can do for you. But I would say I would think of honey, then maple syrup, then agave if I was ranking them. Okay. What are some healthy snacks? Dr. Konda, can you pin that question? What are some healthy snacks?
Absolutely.
What's the latest on corn? Great question. When it come there. Is my video clear to everybody or is it lagging? I'm getting some feedback from my IT that I'm lagging a bit. Is that true for you, Becca?
No, it doesn't seem like it to me at all.
Okay, can I get someone from the group to answer that as well?
No, you're fine.
Okay, is that Andriana or is that a patient or a person outside? She's a person, you guys. Thank you, Mary. Okay, good. Okay, she's a real person.
The sound is matching. Yeah, the sound is matching your lips, so we should be good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay. Good. So why should I have Manuka honey from a glass jar rather than plastic? Leave it to our front desk to ask the most complicated question of the night and the one that's most controversial. So we are putting a lot into our environment and our environment is changing. It's changing rather rapidly. As we can see, even with COVID and this whole crisis, can I get a tissue? As you can see with COVID and this whole crisis, what we're doing with our environment, our proximity to animals, our proximity to each other has changed the way we lived. That has also changed the way bees are able to survive. So we're seeing less and less bees. Because of that, honey is becoming more and more difficult to source. So honey, now when you buy it in those teddy bear jars, which when I was a kid was real honey, is now an ultrafiltrate mixed with sugar. And if you buy it from a glass jar, however, you're usually getting it from a farmer's market or someplace like that. It's very expensive now because bees are so rare. Thank you. Why Manuka honey? Manuka honey is really difficult to get from a glass jar. It is honey itself is a wound healer. We often use it for prevention of radiation damage and things like that in our practice. We like Manuka honey because it's a high grade honey with a high wound healing potential. And when it's sitting in a glass jar, it's not going to pull BPA from the plastic. That kind of chemicals in plastic will upregulate your estrogen receptors and your other hormonal receptors and increase the risk of breast, prostate, and other solid tumors? Very complicated question, and I'm making it harder than it sounds. Remember, everybody, eat real foods, eat just a little less, eat more plants. If you're worried about brands, read the back of the bottle. As somebody just said about Eden Soy, CJ just said, if you look at the back, the less things on the back and the more that you can pronounce those words, the better quality that product is for you. I want to come back to all of these beautiful questions. And I'm going to, first, I'm going to do a little bit of a drawing on how we get cancer. Now, those of you who have seen me talk before or who are patients of mine have seen this drawing before. But I think it's really helpful when we're talking about a cancer fighting diet to talk a little bit about how we get cancer so we understand how nutrition is effective here, okay? So there's three pieces as to how we get cancer. Now, if you're my patient, this drawing was a little more specific to your case. This is going to be super general because I'm talking to you as a group. And I'm not the greatest artist and I'm using one finger to draw. So you guys are going to be super patient with me. Okay. So there's three pieces as to how we get cancer. The first is poor immune surveillance. The second is increased rate of cell growth. And the third is multiple mutations. I'm going to stop that shaking in just a minute. And we'll explain what this means. So every single cell in your body, folks, yours, mine, and your compadres in this group, each one of us, our cells are dividing. Each cell is making two daughters. Each daughter is making two more daughters. And this is happening all day long, just while I'm sitting here in this room. All my cells are dividing and sloughing. The dead ones are sloughing off. That's why you have dead skin cells in your socks and on the floor and everywhere you go. When you shake hands, they slough off, et cetera, et cetera. Who's shaking hands anymore? Nobody during COVID. Before your cells make these daughters, every single cell in your body, before it makes its daughters, it's stopped by border control. Border control surveys the cell and checks for mistakes. That's your surveillance system. If the cell has made a mistake, it tells the cell to kill itself. This is normal. If your border control is out smoking a cigarette, goofing off, flirting with the boys or the girls, whatever have you, then this cell that's made this mistake will pass that mistake on. That's cancer. Does that make sense to everybody? Just a quick amen would be helpful because I can't see anybody right now. Awesome. I'm getting that from...
Amen.
Thank you. So there are strategies to upregulate our border control, and some of those strategies include nutritional strategies. So, for example, mushrooms are an excellent way to increase our border control or upregulate our border control, our surveillance for checking for cell errors. In fact, high quality, dense mushroom soup in a bone broth or a miso broth, 2 cups a day, and you can make it and freeze it with a little bit of butter or a little bit of coconut oil or olive oil if you don't want to do butter, a little bit of avocado oil, a little bit of pink or colored salt, no white salt, folks, colored salt. If we make that and freeze it and do 2 cups a day, it's very helpful for your immune system. It is not necessarily a cancer fighter, because to be a cancer fighter, nutrients have to be given in extremely high doses. That's why we give them as pills, liquids, or powders. However, if we're going to talk about just nutrition today, what's a cancer fighting diet? Mushrooms are excellent because they upregulate our surveillance, okay? But border control is not the only problem. Sometimes border control is not even in our control. No pun intended. For example, if you have a gene mutation like BRCA or Lynch, it's going to be really hard for you to catch cell errors because you have inherited a gene for poor border control. Make sense? I'm just going to assume everybody said yes. Okay.
Yes.
Great. So if you've inherited a gene for poor border control, then that means that you may have, let's say, a 60% chance of getting colorectal cancer, but you'll also have a 40% chance then of never getting colorectal cancer. Why? Why, if I have no border control, can I still go through life and never get cancer? That's because there's other pieces. So remember we talked about cell growth, right? And we talked about inflammation. So anything that increases the rate at which cells are growing in the body is going to make it harder for your weak border control to catch a mistake. It's like an assembly line that's moving too fast. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. So what are the things that increase the rate of cell growth in the body? Inflammation, environmental exposures, hormones. So let's just start with these three and go back to some of these questions here. And I'm just going to pick a couple. I'm not picking on anybody. What about Greek yogurt? Is it good for us? Well, or what about cow's milk? Is it good for us? What does cow's milk do? What does it contain that may increase the rate of cell growth? Well, in order to meet the demand of cow's milk in this country, that's right, somebody whispered hormones. Cows are a given growth hormone, not only to grow, but also to make that milk and meet demand, right? So when you have that cow's milk, particularly one that's not from a high quality farm, like just something you get over the counter, like a Bordines or something like that, you are getting a dose of estrogen and other growth hormones in your body. What does that do? You're getting an actual dose every day, almost like a medication of growth hormones that increases the rate of cell growth in your body. Now, one of us asked, Lila asked, well, what about if I'm lactose intolerant? What does that mean? It means she doesn't have a digestive enzyme to break down that milk. Milk is a really large protein. So it causes gut damage for her, little tiny damage in her blood vessels, in her intestines and in her colon. When that happens, we get inflammation, which increases the rate of cell growth. Inflammation is just another way of saying injury. So when we have inflammation, our body does this beautiful thing. It goes to repair that area. But in order to do so, it must create cells, right? Now, if we have poor immune surveillance and increased rate of cell growth, we can see further how cancer can develop. Make sense to people?
Yes.
Great. What about environmental exposures? Well, somebody asked about Diet Coke. Who was my beautiful friend? Debbie. Debbie asked about Diet Coke. So Diet Coke contains environmental exposures, right? So there's things like phenylketourics in it, and phenylalanine and dyes, and all sorts of things to make it look and taste like caramel, right? Like a spicy, lovely soda poppy caramel. Just kidding. I don't love Diet Coke that much. I know, addict, Debbie, but environmental exposures will increase the rate of cell growth in the body. When we increase the rate of cell growth in the body and we have a difficulty catching cell errors, that's how cell mistakes can progress. Okay?
Dr. Roy, you may have upset Debbie a little bit with the cheese now.
No cheese.
No cheese, no Diet Coke. What am I gonna do?
So it doesn't have to be cow's milk dairy, right? Cow's milk is a very large protein. So let's say you did have cheese every once in a while. Maybe you chose a goat cheese, or maybe you chose a cheese alternative. Although I would prefer, Debbie, if you are at risk for breast, that you did choose not to eat cheese. Maybe you had once a month as a cheat day, or once a week even. Dr. March, who's also with our practice and does nutrition oncology, always tells me 80-20, Dr. Roy. Try to do it right 80% of the time. 20% of the time you can fail and you'll still be okay. Okay, great. So I see a question here about water filters. We'll come back to that, Rebecca. And I promise I'm going to answer everybody's questions. I know it seems insane. I may have to talk super fast at the end, but I will get to everybody. So I want to talk about this last piece. So that's multiple mutations. So we're really talking about the biology of cancer here. What causes cells to grow? What creates cancer? Oh, and my lovely practice manager who's going to post this, whoopsies, I just did that myself. He's going to post for you guys a jot form. You're going to see it in the chat right now. It's a form you can just fill out your email and your phone number. And somebody from our front desk or one of our interns will put you on a mailing list so you can see other times we talk for free. If you want us to give us a call, want us to give you a call, just put your number on there and we'll give you a call as well. And see how we can be of more support to you. There you go. Okay, and he'll post it a couple more times in case you miss it. So here's my lovely patient. This patient has been exposed to a lot of things that may cause cell errors. So the question is, what is causing my cells to make these mistakes in the first place, right? What causes my cells to make the mistakes in the first column? So I'm going to go back to Jeff's question about prostate because I want to honor the answer there. So the things that cause my cells to make mistakes in terms of prostate, Jeff, go ahead and click that jot form. You can fill it out there so everybody doesn't get to see your email and your phone number. We don't want you to get besieged by new friends unless you, of course, want them. So diet is a risk factor with prostate. Obesity is a risk factor with prostate. Exposure to cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs is a risk factor with prostate. Family history and genetics are risk factors with prostate. Help me out here. Environmental exposures are a risk factor with prostate. Age, of course, and race is a risk factor with prostate. Prostatitis, so inflammation in the prostate gland is a risk factor with prostatitis, with prostate. Lack of spiritual life because it has an impact on your immune system's impact on your immune system's response to the world around you. Lack of sleep is a risk factor for prostate, and lack of exercise. Now, I can't catch everybody's disease picture today, so we're just going to focus on prostate because it is analogous to breast, and it is analogous the same as many other solid tumors. These are usually risk factors for most, if not all. So when we're thinking about nutrition, Jeff, and we're thinking about what foods to eat to lower the risk of prostate cancer, our basic strategies: eating a little less, right? That targets obesity. It targets environmental exposures, right? Eating real foods. Now we're talking about environmental exposures again. We're talking about diet here, and eating mostly plants will lower inflammation in the body, lower environmental exposures, lower exposure to hormones, lower the rate of cell growth, and give your border control, Jeff, the chance to catch those cell errors. That's how nutrition is powerful in terms of a medicine to fight disease. Make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to clear this board. If anybody wants to take a screenshot, I'll give you a moment to do that right now. And then I'm going to go back to the questions here and see if there were any that I missed. And if anybody has questions about what causes cancer from a nutrition perspective. So we're shifting the focus a bit. What causes cancer from a nutrition perspective? Dr. Konda, did you want to answer your pinned questions before I scroll through? Because I might be redundant here.
Absolutely. So I believe it was Katrina who asked about adding chlorophyll to your diet. So chlorophyll is a green pigment that is found in plants, including most green vegetables. So some people do take it as a health supplement for its potential benefits. So this includes improving health, boosting energy, etc. With that being said, if your diet is full of healthy plant-based green vegetables, supplementing it is not necessary.
That's a great point. And chlorophyll is an excellent detoxifier. Why? Because it, like Dr. Konda said, it's a highly pigmented food like spirulina, right? Or as a function of spirulina, it lives on the spirulina and other types of algae live on the coastal areas of the world, right? And they're detoxifying our coasts. So when we eat them or when we consume them, we want to make sure that we're getting a super high quality source, because that high quality source we want to make sure it's not contaminated. Does that make sense to everybody? On top of that, we want to make sure that whatever we're taking is not conflicting with drug treatment. If we take something like chlorophyll with drug treatment, we could end up detoxifying ourselves, which means pushing the drug faster through the liver and making it harder for our body to access the benefits from that drug. If we take it with something like radiation, it can compete with radiation by being an antioxidant when radiation is trying to pro-oxidize and kill off those cancer cells. Okay, good point. All right, let's see. What about these other questions here? Again, we're asking the questions that we're focusing on now are what kinds of foods cause cancer? So here's a good question. What about Land O'Lakes, which is butter and olive oil as a soft spread? So Terry, I think it's a very good question because I think it's a little tricky. So Land O'Lakes is a butter and olive oil soft spread. And if it was just butter and olive oil, it would be fine, right? So I don't have a Land O'Lakes right in front of me. I can't look at the back of it. But what I do know about Land O'Lakes is whether I keep it in the refrigerator or whether I put it on the table, it's usually easy to spread, right? It's very spreadable, right? So there may be something in it that keeps it soft that way and keeps it easy to spread. That's an issue, right? Why not, if you're worried about it or you're really trying to fight cancer, just keep butter and olive oil on hand? Why have a formula for that is processed and is in a plastic container? So is also leaching those petrochemicals that can upregulate your hormones and therefore increase your rate of cell growth. Tanya asks, is ghee okay? So ghee is a form of clarified butter. So again, anything that's a real food, Tanya, is fine for you. Just you want to eat a little bit less, right? You want to aim to move towards whole foods, but eat a little bit less. And I'm seeing that a lot of the questions are actually about healthy fats. And so I think when we're thinking about healthy fats or cooking fats, let's think about avocado oils. Let's think about coconut oils. Let's think about olive oil, maybe not to cook with, but definitely to consume. Okay? Great questions, everybody. So I'm going to go through and make sure we're answering all of them. Dr. Konda, did you have another one on your list there?
Yes, Anita asked about iron-rich foods. So if we're focusing on plant-based iron-rich foods, some of these would include your dark green leafy vegetables, such as spinach. Beans and lentils are an excellent source of iron. It's actually what most vegetarians and vegans rely on to get their iron. Blackstrap molasses is another one. And one of my favorites is dark chocolate. It actually has a good amount of iron in it.
Okay, so great. There's a really great website, Linus Pauling, and I'm going to actually see if I can pull it up for you guys. I'm going to stop my share here and I'll go to my picture of my face. It's always shocking to see a big picture of myself all of a sudden. The Micronutrient Institute with Linus Pauling you can actually look at the nutrients themselves, and you can look at a table of the highest sources of whatever nutrient you're interested in. I want to come back to that iron, however, because iron is not something that we should be supplementing during cancer treatment. It enhances or increases the rate of cell growth in the body. So unless you're iron deficient, I do not want you supplementing with supplemental iron. I want you talking to one of us about how to treat the things that you're more concerned about. Perhaps it's fatigue. But if I did click on iron here under the Linus Pauling Institute Micronutrient Information Center, it's through Oregon State University. It's an excellent, excellent source of information. It'll tell you all about iron, but then it'll also tell you at the bottom here, what are the best food sources, of iron in the world. So here are food sources here. The other thing about the one thing that Dr. Konda didn't mention is in a cast iron pan. So cooking in a cast iron pan, particularly, for example, a spaghetti sauce, coming back to Jeff's question about prostate cancer, if you made a really high quality, Jeff, spaghetti sauce once a week in a cast iron pan and then stored it in a glass jar in your refrigerator or freezer and ate that throughout the week, that's a great source of iron because it leaches iron into the spaghetti sauce. It also is a great source of lycopene, which is an excellent way of fighting prostate cancer. So as Dr. Konda mentioned, legumes are high on the list here for iron sources. Raisins, which people don't really think about that often. Oysters, although those are kind of filtering the water and the environment. I don't know if I love those for you. Spinach is an excellent source of iron. So those are good sources there. Again, this is the Linus Pauling Institute for Micronutrients. Okay, great questions there. Good, let's make sure we're answering all of these while I look through. Dr. Konda, did you have another one on your list here?
You have one more. So talking about healthy snacks, there's a plethora of options I could come up with. What I love to, I'm sorry, Dr. Roy?
Oh, so this is a great question. I'm always interested in the answer here.
What I love to do with patients is really making sure that not only am I giving them recommendations of healthier snacks, but it's ones that they're going to enjoy and that they like to eat. So with that being said, a few of my favorites that are very easy to make are just taking an apple and banana, cutting them up and adding some almond butter. You're getting your protein, your healthy fat, and your carbohydrates. So you're going to stay full for a little bit longer until that next meal. Cooked edamame is another fantastic snack. One of my favorites right now, I take half an avocado. And does everyone know that everything bagel seasoning that you can get at Trader Joe's? But I literally just sprinkle it right on there and eat the avocado by itself. Mm-hmm. And back to the dark chocolate with almonds. That one's another great one.
Excellent choices. Is there a healthy popcorn? I don't really know the answer to that one. So there is a question on here. Anita wanted to know, what is the latest on corn? Corn is a little challenging because it's a high yield product in this country. It's grown quite frequently. It may be of low quality. You want to aim for organic if you're going to eat it. It doesn't have a lot of digestible nutrients associated with it. And oftentimes in this country, corn and rice and wheat are genetically modified. And the reason why it's not as nefarious as you think, a lot of people get really upset when they think about genetically modified foods. But the reality is that farmers are trying to maintain themselves with all of these changes in our climate. These micro changes in climate cause micro changes in bacteria, viruses, and other kinds of critters that eat those crops and can damage them. Genetically modified foods are foods that are resistant to weather changes, to storms, to all sorts of predators, to critters. And therefore they maintain farmers' incomes. And most of our exports in this country are those crops in terms of agricultural crops. So it helps to stabilize the US economy. I realize it's very controversial, and I think avoiding GMO foods is important, especially if you're trying to fight cancer or you're trying to lower your risk of recurrence. So if you are going to eat some corn, I really ask that you eat a non-GMO source. Now, the other thing is, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, we did come across data that the government is aware that there's a kind of pesticide that's being used on corn that does cause reproductive problems. As you guys may know, with your grandchildren or your children or your neighbors, people really struggle now with fertility. Our reproductive rates are lowering because of our exposure to chemicals that are used to grow our food. And those chemicals change the way people's eggs and sperm respond to the world around them. Any other questions about those things? Keep them going in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. Okay. But back to Dr. Kanda. So I don't know the answer to this. Do you? Are there any healthy sources of popcorn then?
So I think it's important that everything is in moderation. So like Dr. Roy mentioned, our philosophy is 80-20. So if you're craving popcorn, I don't think it's ultimately something you have to avoid completely. My favorite way to make popcorn is I do purchase organic kernels. So I get that at Whole Foods, and I'll actually make them in the stovetop. So I'll get a decent sized pot, coat the entire thing with coconut oil, add my kernels, add my lid, and let them pop that way versus buying things that are already made in a bag, or you have to pop the kernels in a bag in a microwave.
Okay, that's a great point. I love that. So I think also adding spices to that would be excellent. So we know that any spice that has an odor to it that stinks is a cancer fighter. So that means pepper is a cancer fighter, salt is not, right? But dill, cumin, cinnamon, what are some other good spices? Cayenne, any sort of spice like that is a cancer fighter. Basil, rosemary. So I like to do a similar thing as Dr. Kanda said, but I throw a ton of spices on there to really give it kind of that cancer fighting effect. Okay. And Dr. Kanda, Kathy asked, I have an air popper and I use a non-GMO popcorn and a little bit of popper. Is that okay? A little bit of butter. Is that okay? Absolutely, Kathy. Dr. Kanda, do you agree?
Absolutely, for sure.
Okay, good. So I see a question there on specific, is it safe to supplement iron if not actively in treatment? I'm concerned about low ferritin with normal hemoglobin. So Anita, that's a little bit of a complicated question. So I want to explain why. When patients come to see us, and again, we're posting that JOT form so everybody can go ahead and just click on that and fill out your email. We don't sell anything to you or reach out to you without your permission. And we only reach out to you to answer your questions. So definitely fill it out if you have more questions for us. But coming back to Anita's question, when patients come to see us, Anita, we do a lot in the first and second visit. So in that first visit, we look at all of your history, all of your pathology, your previous treatment, and if you're in treatment, where you are now, and we map out on a whiteboard using a similar kind of basic algorithm that we use just now, but we do it specifically to you as to why this happened with you. Then we draw blood work, and that blood work is very comprehensive. We're looking at everything, not just your liver, lungs, and kidneys and your immune system, but we're also looking at your nutrient status, how you're absorbing nutrients. What are the levels of inflammation in your body? What are the risk predictors that we can use for heart disease and cancer? What's going on with how your body uses fat and sugar? And then you and I, or you and Dr. Konda, will sit down and go through that blood work one by one, and we'll explain to you exactly what's happening in your body. And the reason I'm telling you all this, Anita, is not just because I want all of you to come see me, but also because I want to make sure that in your case, you understand that a low ferritin with a normal hemoglobin doesn't necessarily mean that you're iron deficient. A low ferritin can have to do with how your body's managing inflammation, for example. Ferritin is a bank for iron in your body, but it's also a marker for acute stress. So I can't really accurately answer that question about whether it's safe for you to supplement it, because there can be other things going on. Also, you don't want a doctor that's going to pick and choose, like, oh, low iron, let me give you this drug. Oh, low magnesium, let me give you this supplement. You want someone who's going to look at all of the pieces. When we take a history, we're not just looking at your cancer history. We're looking at when you sleep, how you sleep, what you eat, when you eat, whether or not there's times between how you're eating, what times a day you're most tired, what brings you joy, how you cope in the world, what are your most significant stressors, what is your strategy for managing pain, what is your relationship with God, what are the intimacy partners in your life, what does that look like, all of it. And how your body responds to nutrients does have a lot to do with how you sleep, how you move, who you relate to, and so on. So I don't want to answer that question and mislead you. Okay? But good question. Beautiful. So Cindy's asking, there's so much information here. Will I be able to view this later? I can't keep up with the notes. So Cindy, Becca's recording on her end, and we're also hopefully recording on ours. We will post ours on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. So if you go to our website, which is AIM Natural, and by the way, our video will just have my face on it if anybody's worried about that. If you go to aimnatural.org, and why did I write it on a whiteboard? Here I am on Zoom. I could just pull it up for you, our beautiful website. Let me do that right now. If you go to aimnatural.org and you put in, I hope I know how to do this. Let's see if I know my own website. So I'm putting in aimnatural.org or .com. You can read a little bit about what we do. We've got some beautiful music on there for you. Okay, just kidding on that. And then we can go to the bottom here and you can click on Facebook, and that'll take you to our Facebook page, which has a lot of resources. And if you click on this play button here, Cindy, it'll take you to our YouTube channel. There's a ton of talks on here that help you to understand not only all of these topics in depth, but there's a lot of other speakers on here other than me. So I think that's very helpful. Okay, good. And our practice manager just said to me, it's .com, Dr. Roy, not .org. So aimnatural.com. As you can tell, I'm probably very old, not very good at social media. Okay, good. Let's look at the other questions on here. What about fasting? Tom, that's a really important question. Let's talk about fasting. And Andriana or Dr. Konda, if you could scroll through and make sure we're answering all of these. We have just a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get everybody taken care of today. I think what is a good basic reference book for real food website? So again, Micronutrient Institute, but maybe Dr. Konda, you have other ideas there. And what about water filters, Dr. Konda? Could you take that one? Let's talk about chocolate. That's a good one for Dr. Konda. And I'm going to come back to Tom's question now. So Tom, what about fasting? So fasting is a really important strategy for lowering the, Dr. Conda, that's fine. Dr. Conda just sent a note to me saying she's a nutrition oncologist. She's not sure about water filters. That's okay. I'll pick up on that one. But let's come back to the fasting, and then I'd like to answer the metformin question as well from Jeff. Fasting is a really important strategy that's gaining a lot of traction when we're talking about fighting cancer. Now, I want to help you guys to learn how to look at research. So I'm going to go to pubmed.gov. PubMed.gov is the place where the government posts all clinical data done anywhere in the world at any time on any substance whatsoever. PubMed.gov. So if I put something in here like fasting, for example, Tom, and cancer, I'm going to see what data is available to us. And as you can see, oops, let me clear my filters here. As you can see, there are 8,000 studies on fasting and cancer and how it works. Now, this data is actually written for a medical population, so it's a little hard to understand if you're just a regular civilian. If you have trouble with it, again, reach out to us. Fill out that jot form that my practice manager is going to post one more time, and we will get that information to you. There should be a place on there that they can put questions, right? So there's a place on there that you can also write your questions out, and we'll reach out to you and answer those, okay? So Tom, the data around fasting, if I filter it just for clinical data on the left here, I'm looking just at human trials. There's so much data here. And what it shows, in fact, is that when we fast, we extend the time that our border control has to check for cell errors. So remember in that first column where I was talking about border control and how our border control can be weak in catching a mistake, fasting actually slows the growth of the cell down and increases the time that the border control looks at the cell so that we can improve that surveillance and catch the error before it moves forward. Does that make sense? Now, the problem with fasting is a lot of people start starving themselves to fight cancer. Starving yourself is not the same thing as fasting. Fasting can be very, very simple. It can be just adding an hour before you eat breakfast, or adding an hour after your last meal of the day, so that your time between dinner and breakfast is just a smidge longer. The ideal is 12 hours. If you can get to 13, you're a rock star. Okay, so you want to just kind of increase that time just a bit so that you can increase your border control. Great question. I want to go back to the question about metformin. So by the same token, if I go to pubmed.gov, I don't rely on the internet. I'm not relying on random sources of information. I'm not relying on the news, quote unquote, or on YouTube or on Facebook. I'm relying on actual clinical data. I'm going to put in metformin in cancer, and I'm going to see that there's 5.5 thousand studies on metformin and how it fights cancer. And again, if it says free article, it means the government has posted the entire study, and it's studies that are done anywhere in the world. So if it's done in Poland, it's published. If it's done in Japan, it's published. This is actually part of what your tax dollars pay for, your personal access to data anywhere in the world. So use it. If I go to metformin and I click on this free article, I can read about how metformin works to fight cancer. Now, why does it work to fight cancer? Metformin, we know, is typically used as a drug to lower sugar with diabetes, right? What happens when we lower sugar in the body? Anybody want to shout out an answer? No? Too intimidated? I hope I'm not giving you too much information.
Decreases inflammation.
That is so correct. Who said that?
Well, it says Tom, but my name is Ellen. My husband is the one that has the Zoom app.
100% right. That is 100% right. If this is a blood vessel, Ellen, and this is a heart, all a blood vessel is, go ahead and mute yourself, Ellen. All a blood vessel is it's carrying nutrients from one part of the body to the other, right? So here's my head and here's my feet. See what a great artist I am? I hope you're all hand clapping here. So sugar is one of the nutrients we're eating. In fact, everything we eat will break down to sugar in the body, okay? Sugar, though, in its barest form is pro-inflammatory. So as it's going through the blood vessel, it bumps against the blood vessel wall. And when it bumps against the blood vessel wall, it causes irritation or micro injury, right? That micro injury, that inflammation takes that smooth surface and makes it like sandpaper. So fat, which we're also eating, gets stuck there too. And now we have a narrower blood vessel. That's what a plaque is, or atherosclerosis, right? So that puts more pressure on the pump that's pumping upstream against this flow. And that's why we see hypertension as a function of high sugar, right? So now we're seeing how all these systems combine. What does metformin do? Metformin, basically, it's a little complicated, but basically it lowers the sugar in the body. And in doing so, it lowers inflammation and treats problems like diabetes, only it's only treating it in a symptomatic way. The reason these drugs have been repurposed to fight cancer is we now know that this inflammation is also increasing the rate of cell growth, which makes it harder for us to catch a mistake, which promotes cancer. Make sense to everybody? I hope that wasn't too complicated. I saw someone with their face all up in the video staring. I hope I didn't complicate things. I want to hear from you guys. Unmute yourself. Was that too complicated?
No, you are a great explainer.
I don't know who said that, but thank you very much. Was that
Is
Ellen?
that prescription drug or is that-
I'm so
is that a
sorry. Go ahead.
Is that a prescription drug or is that over the counter? Metformin.
Metformin is a prescription and your oncologist doesn't like to give it to you. So one of the reasons why someone sees us is we come up with individualized strategies to help you to fight cancer. Now, for a prostate cancer patient or a colorectal cancer patient, metformin may be a great choice. However, for someone with a brain tumor, metformin would not be a good choice. So it really does depend on the type of cancer, and it also depends on how that person is managing fat and sugar, which is a complicated process. It's not as simple as just like keeping sugar out of your diet, although I don't want you guys eating white sugar. I try to keep it from my husband. Okay. Any other questions about metformin before we move on? Tanya has a ton of resources on the chat there. She keeps throwing things up there like Dr. Greger's book or shopping in the perimeter of the grocery store. Tanya, I think that's great that you have those resources. Awesome. And Dr. Konda posted a simple guide on whole food and plant-based nutrition. You can see it in the chat there. Go ahead and you can go ahead and copy some of those chats, not just by writing it down, but you can do a screenshot of the chat so that you can keep records of some of these things you're seeing on here. Okay, good. So let's see if there's any other questions that we missed here.
I think some people are wondering why you recommend things like pink salt versus table salt.
Did you want to take that one or do you want me to take that one?
Go ahead and explain that.
Did you say you or me?
I can go ahead and explain it.
Great.
So in your common white table salt, a lot of the minerals are lost in the purification process. So it typically contains less calcium, iron, magnesium. So things like pink Himalayan salt are going to also have those minerals along with iron, or I'm sorry, along with salt.
That's absolutely correct. They're going to have things like magnesium, potassium, anything that has a colored salt is going to have a mix of minerals. It's almost like an electrolyte packet. And you need that mix of minerals because you need those to not only chelate the drugs that you've been exposed to, but to support your heart and your bones from exposure to drug treatment. Okay? Anybody have questions about nutrition and side effects? Somebody asked about side effects of metformin. Yes, so Tanya, when we're talking about metformin, we're talking about whether or not it's the right choice for somebody, right? It's not the right choice for everybody. Metformin can cause liver problems, and we may choose to look at it from a natural perspective first. So for example, for an ovarian cancer patient who has had one recurrence, and I've really worked hard on this person, and they're 6 years without disease, and then they recur 6 years in, I'm going to consider metformin, if they tolerate, at a very low dose, because what I'm doing, I need to take a different mechanism of action or a different strategy. If at that low dose they tolerate, I might combine that with a couple other natural therapies that are also modulators of sugar and raise that dose over time. And then after a year, I may stop them on the metformin and go back to a different strategy. My goal is to keep that person away from disease recurrence. It's not necessarily what are the side effects, right? There are side effects to everything. As we talked earlier, iron is necessary for the body, right? It's the hinge that holds oxygen on the red blood cell truck so we can deliver it to our cells. But if we take too much iron, it can cause all sorts of problems in the body. In fact, too much iron actually causes damage to the heart, the liver, and the lungs. It's actually toxic to you. Okay? Good question, though. Does colored salt have less sodium, Dr. Kanda? And what's the best source of Himalayan pink colored salt? Is it TJ Maxx? Home Goods?
I personally have bought pink Himalayan salt from there. I'm not going to lie.
That's what I asked.
I'm not gonna lie. So pink Himalayan salt does have a little bit of a less content of salt in it. However, that's not of concern when comparing it to consuming pink Himalayan salt instead.
That's right. And it also tastes better. I find that colored salts have a really unique, awesome taste. And now when I try to eat regular salt, it's almost like, oh, it feels very sharp to my tongue. Do you find that to be true, Dr. Kanda? Dr. Kanda, do you know about monk fruit sweetener? Do you want to answer that question?
I truthfully don't know much about it. I haven't had any patients use it, nor do I use it often. What about you, Dr. Roy?
So I do use it in recipes that call for it. Like I might use it if I'm making something that requires like a cake base, like a brownie or something. It's again, we're talking about in that case a fruit, so it's a whole food. It's a fine sweetener. You just want to watch foods that have a high glycemic index that are going to spike your sugar like that. Terry, you asked about the registration info. Said you'd be talking about why people are taking metformin. Can you comment? Do you feel like I answered that effectively? Does anybody have any other questions about drugs like metformin? Honestly, Terry, when they ask us to talk, we literally just throw a bunch of questions at them and move on. We get 40 to 60 emails and voicemails a day, and we love Gilda's, but we can talk about anything, as you can see, at any time. So the topic didn't matter too much to us, but I get that it matters to you. So please let me know if you didn't get that question answered about metformin.
You answered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Okay, good. Again, I'm just scrolling through and making sure we didn't miss anything. We've got just 8 minutes left before we get the Harlem hook. Again, you guys can tell how old I am. What's the best cooking oil? Is basmati and brown rice okay? Dr. Kondo, what do you think the best cooking oil is?
If you're cooking in high heat, that's going to be avocado oil.
I think that's true. Yeah, and coconut oil is excellent for high heat, but it's a saturated fat. So I like avocado oil as well. Basmati and brown rice, are those okay? So they are, you want to aim for organic sources of rice, non-GMO, if you can get it, really well wash it, because it has a lot of dust and debris on it. When I was little, I grew up half of the year overseas in Africa, and my grandmother used to give me this very long basket with rice in it. And I used to have to pick out all the stones and the bugs all day long, shake it, pick out the stones and the bugs. We don't have to do that anymore, but we still should wash it before we cook it. My practice manager just laughed. I'm sure all of you thought that was very interesting. Okay. I know a naturopath who believes in the blood type diet. What are your thoughts on this diet? Tanya, are you a naturopath? You've been posting a ton of resources. Are you?
A nurse.
You're a nurse. Okay, beautiful. So,
Gone through cancer.
oh, okay, wonderful. Not wonderful that you went through cancer, but wonderful that you're with us and you can lend your expertise. So, Tanya, one, thank you for your service, especially during these times. And two, belief is really not a good word in natural medicine. As you can see, when we're talking about all of this data, there is more and more robust data around natural therapies and nutrition. And unfortunately, oncology is quite naive to that data, right? So it's not about belief, it's about what actually has data. The blood type diet, which is what Tanya is asking about, is a diet that looks at if you have a certain blood type, are you more kind of genetically predisposed or hardwired to respond better to different kinds of foods? So it's really just an alternative way of looking at food sensitivities, Tanya. So in other words, if my ethnic background is clearly farming people from China, am I going to respond differently to certain kinds of food than if my ethnic background is Middle Eastern, and I was came from more of a cattle farmer or cattle herder population? And the blood type diet basically assumes that we're not mixed anymore. And as you can see, my mother is Black, my father is Indian. And many people that I know, as if you've done your 24andMe's, or if you've looked around, we're not as clean ethnically as we think we are. That's kind of a loaded word. I wish I hadn't used that, but that's okay. We'll move on from that. So the fact of the matter is that you don't necessarily know what your ethnic background is by looking at your blood type. And the good thing about the blood type diet is whatever type you fall into, the diets that Dr. Adamo recommends are pretty good diets. So again, coming back to eating a little less, eating real foods, shifting more towards plants, even if you fall into the animal category in the blood type diet, are healthy for you. Okay, good question. All right. Is coffee and tea good for you? Are they whole foods? Those are great questions. So we only have 4 minutes left. So if there's anybody who didn't have their question answered, could they throw it in right now so that I can pick it up? Okay. So, we can pick it up, excuse me. So coffee and tea. Coffee and tea are whole foods, absolutely. Tea is an herb or a plant, and coffee is also a bean, right? I like to get an organic brand of coffee that's sustainably harvested, because a lot of those kinds of coffees and teas are harvested in communities where they've been decimated by the demand in Western nations for those products. I like Mount Hagen. I'll type it in here to the chat. Organic coffee, the black top, is, I think, a good coffee for you. And actually, there's new data that shows that 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day, black coffee, does lower the risk of colorectal and breast cancer. So we can extend that to prostate, or we can extrapolate that to prostate. Delia, yes, Delia asked, in the 13-hour fast, can you have water? Yes. You're just restricting nutrients to your food, not water. Okay. Coming back to the question about about brands of stevia. I don't know that one. Andrea, Dr. Kanda, do you know the answer to what brands of stevia are safe?
I'm laughing that I was just thinking I'm going to ask you, having moved back from Toronto, I feel like I'm not fully aware of which brands are best here in the States. It's completely different brands in Toronto. I do purchase Whole Earth here, so I get that at Whole Foods. So that is one of them.
Good. So I'm getting a couple of private messages. I've gotten 4 or 5 so far about becoming a patient. Again, just fill out that JOT form, or you can call the office line, which is 798-2942, and I'll post that for you, or you can email me. And we can talk a little bit further. Now, we don't just make an appointment for you unless you feel comfortable doing that. We actually will talk to you first. And kind of get a sense of what your picture is, because I may not be the best doctor for you. So we have a multidisciplinary clinic. So our clinic doesn't just include me. There are many other doctors, or several other doctors on staff. There are specialists in nutrition, specialists in exercise science. We have mental health professionals that specialize in cancer, grief, depression, anxiety, identity changes. We have people who do oncology massage. We have people who do oncology specific Reiki. It's really about finding the right team approach to your problem. And even then, we may not be the right doctor for you. So we talk with you first and make sure that we're a good fit before we bring it in. Okay, or bring you in, excuse me. And I'm just going to post the actually, can you post the practice information one more time for me, please? My practice manager is going to do that for me right now. Okay, good. Last question is from Anita, who had all the hard questions tonight. All the hard balls came from Anita. Let me find Anita's picture. Anita, is your video up? I need to see your face just because you've asked me all the tough ones. Why would inflammation be elevated if diet and blood sugar is good? So Anita, this is a very complicated question. Okay, so when we're talking about inflammation, we're not just talking about inflammation in your blood vessels. We're also talking about inflammation in your tissues, muscles, and joints. We're talking about inflammation related to different types of cancer. We're talking about an HSCRP, which is an acute process inflammation that's also related to heart tissue. There's lots of different ways that your body's managing injury. Right now I'm sitting here, I look great. I've got this great outfit on. I've got my badge, beautiful environment behind me, but there's still sun coming in through the window. As the sun comes in through the window, it's actually causing my cells on my face to make mistakes. My border control is hopefully catching those mistakes. When my border control catches those mistakes, it tells those cells to kill themselves. If my border control doesn't catch those mistakes, and I, for example, maybe have scratched my skin or I've been picking at it, then I have a little bit of inflammation there. My body's going to rush to try and heal that inflammation. When it does that, it increases the rate of cell growth. Now those mistakes are going to get accelerated. So it doesn't really, it's not just about diet. It's not just about blood sugar. It is also about injury. And injury happens in many different ways. When we're going through cancer treatment, chemotherapy itself can cause inflammation in the body. The steroids that we get with chemotherapy can change the way our body uses fat and sugar, which causes inflammation in the body. Just being stressed, emotionally stressed, just being emotionally stressed causes high level of inflammation in the body because it changes the way your stress hormones manage sugar. So this is the last picture for you guys, and then I'll stop. Becca, are you exhausted yet?
I'm fine. I could honestly, I'm learning a lot.
I was gonna say, because that laugh sounded like, yes, I am.
No, I'm fine.
So last drawing for you guys, when you have a stress response, so when you have a stressor, any sort of stressor, it could be worried about your marriage, it could be worried about your finances, it could be someone honks at you on the road. So it could be acute or it could be chronic. Any sort of stress sends a signal to your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands sit on top of your kidneys, and they are responsible for making adrenaline. I'm just going to write that one out. Adrenaline, adrenal glands. The other word for adrenaline is cortisol. Cortisol is the hormone that is produced in response to stress. Okay? What is cortisol's job? Cortisol's job is to run to the liver and say, hey, dump sugar into the bloodstream. Why? Why is it so important for the liver to dump sugar into the bloodstream? That is because you need that sugar as a fuel to make sure that your heart can pump really fast and your muscles can work to help you to run and your eyes can dilate so you can see better. Your body, in other words, was engineered, designed, evolved, whatever you believe, to manage stress by dumping sugar into your bloodstream. So even if your diet is good, even if you are doing everything right, if you have high levels of emotional stress, then that can cause chronic states of inflammation. I myself had a very hard year, as I'm sure all of you did with COVID. And in that year, my inflammatory levels rose tremendously. And I developed a lot of edema in my feet and in my legs. That had to do with how my heart was unable to manage that stress. You can read about that on our blog on AIM Natural. We're pretty transparent about our personal lives. So it's really important to see somebody, not just myself, but that's why we have clinical psychologists who specialize in mind-body wellness, mindfulness, meditation, post-traumatic stress, cancer diagnosis, grief and depression. That's why we have massage, Reiki. Massage and Reiki in combination are shown, and you can look at PubMed, to significantly lower stress in a cancer population. And exercise, we have exercise specialists on staff like Dr. Konda. If I could pick one thing that all of us could do to lower our risk of getting cancer, lower our risk of recurrence, it is to exercise 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week, at whatever intensity you can, but hopefully to get to a place where you're breathless. That is the most important cancer fighting strategy you have, because it lowers your blood sugar, it lowers inflammation, it helps to manage emotional stress, and it treats the entire system. Okay? I really appreciate everybody listening. I know we went over by 5 minutes, but your time is valuable to me, so I want to let you get to dinner. Thank you for your time. Definitely reach out to us if you have any questions. Fill out that jot form. We're going to post it one last time so that you have 5 more minutes to fill it out, and put your questions on there if you'd like, or put your email and your phone number and we'll reach out to you. We do a lot of free speaking. I don't do as much anymore as the other team members do because my patient schedule is slammed. So I loved doing this. I think the last time I spoke was a year ago. And I'm glad I see all those props, all those hand claps, and we both really appreciate it. Dr. Konda, do you have anything you want to say?
Absolutely. Thank you so much to you all for coming in and joining us. I hope you guys got all your questions answered, and looking forward to speaking with you all in the future.
Will there be a handout or other ways to review what was said today?
So Becca's going to answer that, whether there'll be other ways to review it. And then one more time, If you go to AIM Natural and you click at the bottom on that little play button, we should have that this video posted pretty soon, or Becca will tell you how you can get it through Gilda's. But it was an honor to talk with all of you. I say this always at the end, and then Becca, I'll let you close out. All of you keep us humble. You keep us in the present. It is truly our honor to serve you and be with you every step of the way in your journey. We do an excellent job fighting with you, but you're our real heroes. Okay. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Gil.
Thank you both so much. I mean, I can't thank you enough. I know I learned a ton, and I can tell by the responses that it was very valuable for everyone. So just thank you so much from the bottom of our heart at Gilda's for your time. It was wonderful.
Oh, no problem.
And I would suggest, I know going to her website will be probably the easiest way to stream it, because if I send it to you, which I can definitely do, it's a very large file. So I'm going to just pop my email in the box one more time. If you would prefer to get it that way, it's no problem. I can send it that way. But by going to the AIM Natural site, you'll also be able to stream it probably a bit easier.
Okay, great. That's awesome. All right, folks. Good night. And
Good
be
night.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.
night and be well.
Great.